old as the house itself, secrets that had begun whispering through the shadows that dwelled in every corner of their ancestral home. Dinner at the Blackstone estate was a somber affair that evening, served precisely at 7 o'clock as tradition demanded. The dining room's walnut wainscoting absorbed what little conversation emerged between spoonfuls of mock turtle soup, while the silver candelabra cast wavering light across the damask tablecloth. Outside, an unseasonable chill had descended upon the hollow, coaxing tendrils of fog from the creek bed that meandered through the lower fields. "Your brother writes that Richmond grows anxious," Elizabeth informed her husband, Augustus, who sat rigid at the head of the mahogany table that had crossed the Atlantic with his grandfather in 1791. The Union forces pressed closer each week. Augustus Blackstone nodded without lifting his gaze from his plate. At 57, his once commanding presence had diminished. Shoulders slightly stooped beneath his brocade waistcoat. The war had halved the value of his tobacco fields, but it was the older burden, the weight of inheritance, that truly bent his frame. "Perhaps we should consider your sister's invitation to Savannah," Elizabeth continued, her words measured, each syllable precise as the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. "The Blackstones do not flee," Augustus replied, his baritone hardly disturbing the heavy air. "We have weathered worse than Yankees." Indeed they had. The cholera outbreak of 1833 had claimed Augustus's parents and 2 siblings within a fortnight. The financial panic of 1837 had nearly ruined the family holdings, and there was the winter of 1849, which no Blackstone discussed aloud, but which had necessitated the addition of 3 unmarked graves in the family plot. Young William, barely 9 years old, dropped his spoon with a clatter that startled everyone present. "Father," he whispered, eyes wide, "there's someone standing behind your chair." Augustus turned sharply, finding only the empty space before the hearth, where a fire combated the unusual chill. "Nonsense, boy. Control your imagination." "I saw it too," little Catherine offered, her voice small as a sparrow's. "A tall man with a beard like Uncle Thaddeus had." Elizabeth's teacup trembled slightly against its saucer. Uncle Thaddeus had died 3 years before Catherine's birth. "Children," Elizabeth admonished gently, though her eyes betrayed her unease, "we must not indulge in fancies." Later, as Elizabeth helped Harriet clear the dishes, the housekeeper's weathered hands paused over a serving platter. "The children see what's always been here, madam," she murmured, voice scarcely audible above the clink of china. "The old ones are restless now." "I don't know what you mean," Elizabeth replied too quickly, though she'd noted how Harriet had taken to placing small saucers of salt at thresholds throughout the house. "This land remembers what's buried in it," Harriet continued, her tidewater accent thickening as it always did when she spoke of matters beyond the physical realm. "And with young Master Thomas away at war, the barriers grow thin." That night, as Elizabeth brushed her hair before the vanity mirror, she counted 100 strokes as her mother had taught her, a ritual meant to ensure beautiful tresses and peaceful slumber. Upon the 97th stroke, her reflection blinked when she did not. Elizabeth set down the silver brush with trembling fingers, remembering the ledger hidden beneath the loose floorboard in Augustus's study, the one recording transactions not of tobacco or cotton, but of human souls, bearing the names of people whose descendants still worked the Blackstone fields, though now as paid laborers rather than chattel. Some debts, Elizabeth knew, could not be settled with Union victory or Confederate surrender. Some ledgers remained open long after the ink had dried. The following morning broke with disjointed light filtering through the mist that clung to Blackstone Hollow like a burial shroud. Augustus rose at dawn, as was his custom, though his sleep had been fragmented by dreams of shadowed figures standing at the foot of the bed. He dressed methodically, the routine of 40 years providing comfort against the disquiet that had settled into his bones. In his mahogany shaving stand mirror, Augustus observed the deepening hollows beneath his eyes. His once auburn hair had retreated to expose more of his high forehead, and what remained had silvered completely in the years since the unpleasantness of 1849. A small scar bisected his left eyebrow, a souvenir from his time at William and Mary, where he had studied law before assuming management of the estate, upon his father's unexpected passing. "You look unwell," came a voice from the doorway. Augustus turned to find his younger brother, Nathaniel, leaning against the doorframe. Despite being only 2 years Augustus's junior, Nathaniel appeared a decade younger, his face relatively unlined, his posture military straight, the benefit of having shouldered fewer familial responsibilities. "I wasn't aware you had arrived," Augustus replied, carefully wiping the remaining lather from his jaw with a monogrammed towel. "We expected you tomorrow." "The roads were clear," Nathaniel replied, stepping into the room. He wore a charcoal morning coat that emphasized his still athletic frame. As the second son, Nathaniel had been afforded the luxury of pursuing his interests, primarily archaeological studies at the university in Charlottesville, where he held a modest teaching position. "I thought perhaps I might examine the artifacts in the old storehouse," Nathaniel continued. "The Powhatan relics could prove valuable to my current research." Augustus's jaw tightened. "That building remains locked for good reason, Nathaniel. Some matters are best left undisturbed." In the breakfast room, Mary sat alone at the table, her 14-year-old fingers tracing patterns on the tablecloth. Her copper hair, so like her mother's, was pulled back in a simple chignon, revealing a face that had begun its transformation from childish roundness to womanly angles. Unlike her siblings, Mary possessed a preternatural stillness that unsettled even her father. "Good morning, Uncle," she said without looking up, though Nathaniel had made no sound as he entered. "You've brought something with you." Nathaniel paused mid-stride. "Only my traveling cases, child." Mary's gray eyes finally lifted to meet his. "Not something," she corrected softly. "Someone. She followed you from the university. She's very angry." Before Nathaniel could respond, Harriet entered carrying a silver coffee service. The housekeeper's once black hair had grayed at the temples, and deep lines bracketed her mouth, yet her heritage, a complex lineage that included both African and indigenous ancestry, granted her a dignity that transcended her station. "The missus asks that you join her in the conservatory after breakfast, Master Nathaniel," Harriet announced, her eyes deliberately avoiding the empty corner where Mary's gaze remained fixed. "She wishes to discuss arrangements for the summer solstice dinner." The tradition of marking the longest day with an elaborate feast predated even the Blackstone acquisition of the property. What none in the household acknowledged was how, in the hours after midnight on that particular date, the boundary between the living and the restless dead seemed to disappear altogether. The solstice dinner preparations consumed the household throughout the day, with servants polishing silver that gleamed with almost hungry eagerness in anticipation of the evening ceremony. As afternoon shadows stretched like grasping fingers across the lawn, Elizabeth retreated to her private sitting room, ostensibly to review the menu, though in truth she sought momentary solitude from the oppressive atmosphere that had descended upon Blackstone Hollow. A leather-bound volume lay open upon her writing desk, the family Bible, its pages yellowed with age, its margins crowded with notations recording births, marriages, and deaths dating back to the first Blackstone who had claimed this land. Elizabeth's fingers trembled as they traced the entry from 1849. Thaddeus Elijah Blackstone returned to God's embrace, December 3rd. The ink had faded to a rusty brown that reminded her uncomfortably of dried blood. No cause of death appeared beside Thaddeus's name, nor for the 3 servants who had passed during that same terrible week. The Bible recorded only that they had departed, as though their cessation had been as unremarkable as guests taking leave after an overlong visit. A soft scratching sound drew Elizabeth's attention to the window. The wisteria branches swayed against the glass panes, though no breeze stirred the humid afternoon air. As she watched, the scratching intensified, and the pattern of movement became deliberate. 3 slow drags followed by 4 quick taps, repeating with mechanical precision. "You must be mistaken," Elizabeth whispered to the empty room. "We settled that debt." The scratching ceased immediately, leaving only the thunderous silence of acknowledgement. In the east wing, Nathaniel had defied his brother's admonition and slipped into the storehouse using the key he'd had privately duplicated years earlier. Dust motes danced in the slanting light that penetrated the grimy windows, illuminating rows of wooden crates and glass display cases draped with yellowed sheets. The air inside hung thick with the commingled odors of mildew, decayed leather, and something else, a metallic tang reminiscent of old pennies. He moved purposefully toward the rear of the cramped building, pausing before a particular crate marked with symbols rather than letters. Carefully, Nathaniel prized open the lid, revealing a collection of stone artifacts nestled in straw, arrowheads, a pestle, and a carved tablet approximately the size of a man's palm. The tablet bore markings unlike any Powhatan designs catalogued in academic texts. Its surface featured concentric circles surrounding a central figure that might have been human, though the proportions seemed deliberately distorted, the arms too long, the head unnaturally elongated. Around this figure, tiny handprints had been painstakingly etched into the stone, each missing the final joint of the smallest finger. As Nathaniel lifted the tablet, his shadow on the wall behind him remained motionless, though he himself trembled with excitement. Only when he tucked the artifact into his coat pocket did his shadow stir, moving not to follow him, but to reach toward the collection of personal effects in another open crate, items that had once belonged to servants whose remains lay in unmarked graves beyond the family cemetery. In the kitchen, Harriet crushed dried herbs with a mortar and pestle, whispering words her grandmother had taught her, words in a language older than English, older even than the African tongues her ancestors had been forbidden to speak. She sprinkled the mixture across each threshold, her lips moving in silent prayer, for she alone understood what the night would bring when darkness finally claimed Blackstone Hollow and the longest day surrendered to the hungry shadows of midsummer night. The conservatory glass refracted the late afternoon sunlight into prismatic patterns across the marble floor, while Elizabeth and Nathaniel spoke in hushed tones amidst the exotic ferns and orchids Augustus had imported at great expense. Neither noticed young Catherine pressed against the exterior wall, her ear to the glass, her shadow oddly absent despite the slanting sunbeams. "The tablet is certainly pre-colonial," Nathaniel explained, his scholarly demeanor betrayed by the feverish gleam in his eyes, "but it bears symbols inconsistent with known indigenous iconography. The sacrifice depicted here suggests rituals never documented among the Powhatan." Elizabeth's fingers fluttered nervously at her throat. "You should return it, Nathaniel. Some knowledge is not meant for preservation. That's superstition speaking, sister. Consider instead the historical significance. This land held secrets long before the Blackstones arrived." He lowered his voice further. "The native shamans knew how to keep certain entities at bay. The ceremonies your husband's grandfather disrupted when he claimed this hollow." "Enough," Elizabeth hissed, glancing toward the doorway where Harriet appeared, her face deliberately impassive, though her eyes betrayed awareness of their conversation. "Begging your pardon, madam," Harriet interjected. "Master William has taken ill. Dr. Hamilton has been summoned." In the boy's bedchamber, William thrashed against sweat-dampened sheets, his skin burning with fever though the room remained unnaturally cold. Above his bed, the shadows swirled in patterns that defied the stationary oil lamp, forming shapes resembling crowded figures with elongated fingers. "Started just after he returned from playing near the old plantation cemetery," Augustus explained to Dr. Hamilton, whose medical bag seemed inadequate against the miasma of dread that permeated the room. The physician's examination revealed an odd mark upon the child's palm, 5 tiny punctures arranged in a pattern matching the handprint on Nathaniel's stolen tablet. "I've never encountered such symptoms," Hamilton confessed, his scientific certainty faltering as the shadows on the ceiling appeared to bend toward William's bed. In the library, Mary sat composed at the writing desk, transcribing onto foolscap with mechanical precision. Her hand moved without hesitation, though her eyes remained unfocused, as if seeing beyond the room's confines. The text flowed in an antiquated script not her own, from the Journal of Matthias Blackstone, June 21st, 1801. "The bargain struck this day shall bind my lineage to prosperity for generations hence. The native elder warned of consequences should the covenant be broken. But what are savage superstitions against Christian determination? The artifacts are secured beneath the storehouse floor, and with them, the means by which the hollow's original inhabitants controlled what dwells in the shadows. Better these dark arts remain buried than remembered. The ceremonial tablet I shall keep separate, its power a safeguard should future need arise. 7 drops of blood upon the circle with each solstice will maintain the boundary. This secret I entrust only to these pages and my firstborn son." Mary's handwriting suddenly altered, becoming jagged and urgent. "They promised us freedom in death at least, yet even this was denied. Our shadows remain bound while our souls cry for justice. The covenant breaks tonight when blood spills without ceremony. Tonight we reclaim what was stolen, our very forms." The grandfather clock in the hall began tolling the hour, though the sun still hung above the horizon. 6 chimes, then 7. Continuing beyond all reason as the longest day prepared to surrender to the hungry dark. The solstice dinner commenced precisely as the 8th unnatural toll from the grandfather clock faded into silence. The dining room blazed with candlelight that seemed powerless against the encroaching darkness pooling in the corners. Silver gleamed with sinister brightness upon crisp white linen as servants moved with practiced efficiency, placing before each Blackstone a portion of roasted duck glazed with currant sauce, all except William, whose empty chair stood in silent accusation. Through the leaded glass windows, the sunset painted the western sky in shades of vermilion and violet, colors too vivid to be entirely natural. The longest day clung desperately to its final moments, as if aware of what awaited in the coming night. "Thomas would have appreciated Cook's efforts this evening," Nathaniel remarked, attempting to dispel the oppressive silence that had settled over the table. The stone tablet pressed against his breast pocket through the fine wool of his dinner jacket, its presence a constant, cold reminder of his transgression. Augustus cut into his meat with mechanical precision, the knife scraping against Limoges porcelain with a sound like fingernails on slate. "Thomas understood duty," he replied, his gaze fixed upon his plate, something this generation seems to have forgotten. Upstairs, young William's fever had subsided into an unnatural stillness. Dr. Hamilton, nodding intermittently as exhaustion claimed him, failed to notice how the boy's shadow rippled against the wall, stretching and contracting with rhythmic movement reminiscent of breathing, though William's chest barely rose with each shallow inhalation. The doctor's own shadow remained oddly fixed, refusing to mimic his occasional shifting in the bedside chair. When Hamilton did finally glance toward the wall, momentary confusion crossed his features as he observed his silhouette's hand raising slowly toward its throat, while his physical appendage remained motionless on the armrest. In the dining room, Mary methodically arranged her food in geometric patterns, never lifting a morsel to her lips. Her copper hair caught the candlelight, creating a halo effect that contrasted sharply with her ominous words. "The earth beneath us hungers more than we do this evening." Elizabeth's fork clattered against her plate. "Mary, such talk is inappropriate for dinner conversation. Forgiveness requires sacrifice," the girl continued as if her mother hadn't spoken. "That's what Uncle Thaddeus discovered in '49. Isn't that right, Father? When he threatened to expose what lay beneath the storehouse?" Augustus's face drained of color, the lines around his mouth deepening into crevasses of suppressed rage and undeniable fear. "Leave the table at once, child." Outside, purple twilight surrendered to indigo darkness as the summer solstice completed its transformation. The wisteria branches beyond the dining room windows swayed with sudden violence, though no wind disturbed the heavy air. Each blossom seemed to turn toward the glass, pressing phantom faces against the barrier that separated cultivated civilization from primal wilderness. Harriet entered silently, her expression grave as she leaned to whisper in Elizabeth's ear. The mistress's hand flew to her mouth, stifling a cry that threatened to shatter the fragile veneer of normalcy. "Dr. Hamilton has collapsed," Harriet murmured, her voice carrying despite her attempt at discretion. "And Master William?" She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the darkened hallway beyond the dining room door. "Master William is no longer in his bed, though the door remained locked from outside. We found only a shadow on his sheets, madam, a shadow that moved when the candle remained still." As if summoned by this revelation, the lights throughout the dining room dimmed simultaneously, the flames shrinking to mere pinpricks against the encroaching darkness. And in that diminished illumination, each diner witnessed with breathless horror how their shadows detached from their forms, rising from chairs while their physical bodies remained seated, dark silhouettes standing in silent judgment behind their human counterparts. The candlelight guttered as a sudden chill permeated the dining room. Outside, the last crimson streaks of sunlight surrendered to darkness, completing the solstice transformation. The shadows stood sentinel behind each family member, perfect inversions that seemed more substantial than their owners. "They've waited since 1849, Harriet whispered, pressing herself against the wainscoting, her hand clutching a small pouch of protective herbs. When the covenant was broken, Augustus rose suddenly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "This discussion ends now," he commanded, though his authoritative tone wavered. His shadow did not follow as he stood, but remained seated at the table, its head tilted in mocking defiance. Elizabeth reached for the silver bell to summon additional servants, but found her arm immobilized, not by physical constraint, but by her shadow's will imposed upon her flesh. The darkness had substance now, a palpable force pressing against the family like an incoming tide. In the corner of the room, the grandfather clock struck midnight, though such an hour was impossible given the early evening. With each sonorous toll, the portraits of Blackstone patriarchs lining the dining room walls seemed to alter subtly, eyes widening, expressions contorting into masks of terror or complicity. The Richmond Enquirer carried a curious article in its December 7th edition of 1849, Nathaniel said, his academic detachment crumbling as his shadow placed phantom hands upon his shoulders. 5 workers from the Blackstone estate reported missing after a ritualistic gathering. The newspaper attributed their disappearance to superstitious practices brought from Africa. From his pocket, Nathaniel withdrew a yellowed newspaper clipping. Curious disappearances in County, December 7th, 1849. Intelligence reaches us of a most peculiar occurrence at the Blackstone estate, wherein 5 persons of color, recently emancipated by their former master's testament, have vanished under circumstances suggesting heathen ritual. The late Thaddeus B. had, in a fit of abolitionist fervor unbecoming his station, decreed their freedom upon his passing, which occurred under mysterious circumstances this past week. Authorities have uncovered evidence of barbarous ceremonies conducted in the old Indian burial ground adjacent to the plantation. The current proprietor, Mr. A. B., expresses bewilderment at these developments, though assures this correspondent that such superstition shall find no further purchase upon his lands. Elizabeth's hands trembled as the truth surfaced from generations of careful burial. Thaddeus discovered what your grandfather had done, she whispered to Augustus. The original bargain, 7 lives taken and buried beneath the storehouse to bind the shadows to our service. When Thaddeus threatened exposure, I protected our legacy, Augustus hissed, his composure fracturing like thin ice in spring thaw. Thaddeus would have destroyed everything with his moral awakening. He forgot that our prosperity was built on necessary sacrifice. Mary's shadow stretched toward her father, its elongated fingers caressing his face, though the girl herself remained motionless. Grandfather's journal explained it clearly, she said, her voice eerily calm. The native burial ground contained something older than their tribes, something that lived in shadows and required appeasement. Great-grandfather learned their rituals but perverted them. Instead of offering blood to contain the entities, he offered souls to enslave them. The temperature plummeted further as Mary continued, her words emerging as visible vapor in the frigid air. When Uncle Thaddeus freed those meant for sacrifice, you murdered him instead, Father. But his blood wasn't enough. The covenant demanded 7 on the solstice. You've made us live among half-freed shadows for 13 years, neither bound nor truly released. On the eastern knoll, blue flames suddenly flickered above the unmarked graves, visible through the dining room windows, spectral beacons illuminating a truth long suppressed beneath Blackstone respectability and wealth. The unnatural stillness that had temporarily paralyzed the Blackstone dining room shattered as the chandelier above them swayed on its chain, crystals chiming a discordant melody without wind to disturb them. The portrait's eyes now followed each occupant with undisguised hunger, the painted irises contracting like those of predators sighting prey. Augustus lurched toward the door, abandoning all pretense of patriarchal dignity. His hand clutched at his waistcoat where the key to the storehouse pressed against his ribs like an accusation. Yet as he reached the threshold, his legs faltered, not from weakness but from the sudden weight of his shadow, which had wrapped itself around his ankles in tenebrous shackles. "You cannot outrun inheritance," intoned Harriet, her voice transformed, resonating with the cadence of generations before her. She stood straighter now, shoulders squared, the deference cultivated through years of service entirely evaporated. In her hands, she held a small, carved figure fashioned from beeswax and bone, a protection charm her grandmother had taught her to create. The land demands restoration. The shadows demand forms. Through the windows, the blue flames above the unmarked graves rose higher, casting an ethereal illumination that transformed the manicured grounds into an alien landscape. The wisteria vines had entirely covered the glass now, their blossoms pressing against the panes like countless small faces. "Listen," Mary whispered. Beneath the persistent tolling of the impossible midnight hour came another sound. Footsteps upon the gravel path leading to the house. Heavy, deliberate steps accompanied by lighter, shuffling ones. The cadence of a military march mingled with the dragging gait of exhaustion or injury. Elizabeth gasped as recognition dawned. Thomas? But Nathaniel, whose academic skepticism crumbled beneath the weight of undeniable evidence, shook his head slowly. "Not only Thomas," he murmured, the stone tablet now burning cold against his chest. "They're all returning. Everyone sacrificed to maintain the covenant. The dining room mirror above the sideboard clouded as if breathed upon by winter air, though the temperature had plunged well below human breath's visibility. Within its silvered surface appeared not reflections of those present, but scenes from 1849. Thaddeus Blackstone discovering the ledger, his confrontation with Augustus, the struggle that ended with a fireplace poker and hasty burial beneath midnight skies. The 5 emancipated workers witnessing what should have remained hidden, their terrified flight halted by shadows that moved against nature's laws. Catherine, who had remained eerily silent throughout the revelations, suddenly spoke in a voice too ancient for her 7 years. The solstice threshold stands open. What was divided seeks reunification. As if responding to her proclamation, the front door crashed open with splintering force. Into the entrance hall spilled not the anticipated figures, but rather their shadows, formless, writhing darkness that advanced with dreadful purpose. Among them moved a military silhouette whose edges bled and reformed with each motion, Thomas returning not in flesh, but in umbral essence. Augustus collapsed to his knees, the arrogance of generations finally broken against the immovable truth. The shadows converged upon him first, darkness flowing over his form like water, seeking ingress through eyes and mouth. His scream began as human terror, but transformed into something hollow and resonant, the sound of a vessel being occupied by that which had waited 13 years for satisfaction. The shadows moved with terrible purpose through the dining room, a confluence of darkness that seemed to breathe and pulse with collective memory. Each silhouette retained just enough human-like quality to reveal its original owner. Thomas's military bearing, Thaddeus's scholarly stoop, the distinct forms of the 5 workers whose names had been methodically struck from the family Bible after their disappearance. As they surrounded Augustus, his body convulsed, spine arching at an impossible angle, while darkness poured into him like liquid night. Nathaniel clutched the stone tablet so tightly his knuckles blanched. Its surface had grown warm now, the etched handprints seeming to press outward against his fingers. With academic precision honed through years of archaeological study, he recognized the terrible symmetry unfolding before him, a ritual reversed, a covenant reclaimed by those who had been its unwilling guarantors. The circle must be completed, he stammered, the scholar within him still struggling to categorize the horror even as it unfolded. 7 were taken in 49. 7 must be claimed tonight. Elizabeth's shadow had fully detached now, standing beside her with one umbral hand resting possessively on her shoulder. When she spoke, her voice emerged as a harmonized duet with her darker self. Not claimed, they corrected in haunting stereo. Merged. What was sundered seeks wholeness. Outside, the wisteria branches scratched a frenzied rhythm against the windows, their movements forming patterns reminiscent of the symbols on Nathaniel's tablet. The blue flames had migrated from the unmarked graves, trailing across the lawn like spectral serpents to converge upon the house. Where they touched the foundation stones, the mortar cracked and ancient sigils carved into the granite became visible. Protective markings commissioned by the first Blackstone patriarch but improperly maintained by his descendants. Mary stood with preternatural calm as her shadow embraced her, darkness flowing around her copper hair like a lover's caress. Unlike Augustus, she neither fought nor screamed as the merging began. Her eyes, briefly illuminated from within by cerulean light, reflected not terror but profound relief. The covenant required renewal with each generation, she explained, her voice echoing as if spoken simultaneously from the bottom of a well and inches from their ears. Great-grandfather understood this. Grandfather perverted it. Father abandoned it. 7 souls to bind, 7 souls to contain what dwells beneath Blackstone Hollow. Harriet's protection charm smoldered suddenly, the beeswax melting between her fingers without burning her skin. The bone fragments within it rearranged themselves into a miniature replica of the tablet's central figure. This land was never truly yours, she told Nathaniel, her eyes reflecting centuries of accumulated knowledge. The Blackstones merely borrowed it from older presences, paying rent with blood and shadow until Thaddeus's conscience disrupted the arrangement. From upstairs came the sound of small feet on hardwood, William descending from his sick room, though the doctor had sworn the boy lay insensate. His shadow preceded him into the dining room, moving with the confidence of an entity far older than 9 years. It extended an ephemeral hand toward Catherine, who nodded solemnly before offering her own shadow in greeting. The grandfather clock struck 13. a 13th hour that defied temporal possibility, and with this final impossible toll, the very foundations of Blackstone Manor trembled. Beneath the storehouse, something ancient stirred, disturbed from slumber by the breaking of chains forged through generations of meticulous human sacrifice. Elizabeth fell back against her chair, lips parted in silent horror as Augustus writhed upon the floor, his form now more shadow than substance. The darkness that had invaded him pulsed beneath his skin, causing his features to ripple like disturbed water. His eyes, once a steely gray that commanded respect throughout the county, had transformed into depthless pools of ink that reflected nothing. Nathaniel clutched the tablet with trembling hands, its surface now burning hot against his palms. His scholarly mind, that rational instrument which had navigated antiquity's mysteries with detached precision, frantically sought understanding in ancient knowledge. The original ceremony, he gasped, required willing participation. The shadows and their vessels joined by choice, not coercion. Through the dining room's eastern window, a new phenomenon manifested across the grounds. The earth above each unmarked grave had begun to subside, creating perfect circular depressions that mirrored the concentric rings on the stone tablet. From these hollows rose tendrils of mist that twined together in the darkness, forming a vaporous pathway leading directly to the storehouse. "The ledger," Harriet said suddenly, her eyes widening with revelation. The true names were recorded there, not just in the transaction records, but in the secret pages. Elizabeth nodded, comprehension dawning through her terror. Augustus's study, the loose floorboard beneath the Persian carpet. Without waiting for further explanation, Nathaniel rushed from the room, the scholar's instinct for hidden knowledge temporarily overcoming his fear. The hallway stretched before him like a throat, shadows pulsing along the walls in rhythm with the blue flames now visible through every window. Family portraits watched his progress, their painted eyes following with hungry anticipation. In Augustus's study, the furniture had rearranged itself. The massive oak desk now centered precisely upon the Prussian carpet, its drawers opened at varying degrees like a chambered nautilus. Nathaniel dropped to his knees, flinging back the carpet with desperate strength. The loose floorboard revealed itself immediately, almost rising to meet his searching fingers. The hidden compartment contained not merely a ledger but a small iron-bound chest secured with a tarnished brass lock. Upon its lid, the same symbols from the tablet had been etched into the metal and filled with some dark substance that might have been pitch or dried blood. With shaking hands, Nathaniel withdrew both items. The ledger's leather binding felt unnaturally warm, as though recently handled, though dust coated its surface. When he opened it, the pages turned of their own accord, settling on entries from December 1849. December 3rd, brothers' meddling necessitated final measures. The 5 witnesses must follow him before dawn. Their shadows already grow restless, sensing the barrier's weakness. The old ceremonies must be observed precisely this solstice, lest what sleeps beneath awaken fully. December 5th, buried the ritual implements with Thaddeus. His blood has temporarily strengthened the boundary, but without the 7, the covenant weakens. I alone understand what great-grandfather bound beneath this land, what sustains our prosperity through its containment. December 21st, solstice night. The substitution of blood essence for willing sacrifice has been accepted, though I sense the arrangement remains tenuous. The shadow bindings hold, but have changed in nature. Our silhouettes no longer obey natural law. A worrisome development, but preferable to the alternative. As Nathaniel read the final entry, the small chest in his lap emitted a distinct clicking sound as its lock opened of its own accord, revealing its terrible contents. 7 finger bones, each carved with minute symbols, nestled in a bed of soil taken from the unmarked graves. The iron-bound chest seemed to exhale as Nathaniel lifted the ossified finger bones, each one radiating a cold that penetrated beyond flesh. Moonlight now streamed through the study windows in impossible lunar fullness, though the almanac had predicted a waning crescent for this solstice night. The silvery illumination revealed microscopic script spiraling around each bone, names written in a hand so minute they could only have been inscribed with an instrument finer than any human craftsman could produce. From elsewhere in the house came sounds of transformation, wood splintering, glass fracturing, and beneath it all, a hollow moaning that might have been wind through ancient oaks were it not for the distinctive cadence of human voices merged in collective lamentation. Tucked beneath the finger bones, Nathaniel discovered a folded piece of parchment, its creases worn thin from repeated handling. The document bore the unmistakable flourishes of colonial legal script, the edges singed as if someone had attempted to destroy it, but lost courage at the final moment. Its heading proclaimed, "Covenant of Occupation," in elaborate calligraphy. The date beneath reading, "This 17th day of June, year of our Lord 1791. The text revealed the true foundation of Blackstone prosperity, not merely a bargain for shadows, but a treaty with what dwelled beneath the hollow. And be it further agreed that the entities resident upon these lands from time immemorial shall permit human habitation and cultivation provided proper observances are maintained. The undersigned, Matthias Blackstone, hereby commits his lineage to the provision of 7 willing vessels upon each 3rd generation. These vessels to serve as hosts for the shadow forms during the span of 1 natural human lifetime. Should this covenant be breached through deception or resistance, the shadows shall reclaim independent existence and seek vessels of their choosing. All Blackstone progeny shall become subject to collection, regardless of age or station. The enclosed ritual implements, fashioned from the removed digits of previous covenant keepers, shall remain sealed except during prescribed ceremonies. Their exposure to moonlight without proper preparation shall constitute immediate dissolution of all protective boundaries. With growing horror, Nathaniel realized his actions had triggered the very catastrophe these warnings sought to prevent. By exposing both tablet and finger bones to solstice moonlight, he had accelerated the dissolution of boundaries already weakened by his brother's abandoned responsibilities. A tremor shook the foundation of the house, books toppling from shelves as plaster dust rained from the ceiling. The trembling spread outward, visible through the window as a rippling disturbance traversing the grounds toward the storehouse. The earth heaved once, violently, and the small outbuilding collapsed inward, with a sound like distant thunder. From the ruined structure rose a column of absolute darkness that defied the moonlight, expanding upward like ink dispersing in water. This manifestation bore a vague anthropomorphic form, limbs elongated beyond human proportion, head tilted at an impossible angle. Yet it constantly shifted, as if its true form could not be contained by human perception. In that moment of terrible revelation, Nathaniel understood the full implications of his family's bargain. The Blackstones had never truly owned this land. They had merely served as caretakers for something that had claimed this territory long before European settlement, something that had initially accommodated human presence through ceremonial compromise, but whose patience had finally, irrevocably expired. The column of darkness swelled against the night sky, obliterating stars as it expanded across the vault of heaven. It moved with deliberate malevolence, undulating like a massive serpent tasting the air, seeking its prey. The moonlight that had moments before bathed the grounds in silvery radiance now retreated before this ancient presence, as if even celestial illumination cowered in its presence. Nathaniel clutched the unholy relics to his chest, their cold burning through his waistcoat as he stumbled back toward the dining room. His academic mind, that rational instrument that had served him faithfully through decades of scholarly pursuits, fractured against the impossible truth unfolding before him. This was knowledge too terrible for preservation in university archives. Wisdom never meant for treatises bound in calfskin and displayed in glass cases. The hallway before him stretched and contracted like a living throat, the wallpaper pattern shifting into faces contorted in silent screams. Generations of victims, not merely the 7 from 1849, but dozens more stretching back to the original covenant, gazed at him from within the whorls and floral designs. Their eyes followed his desperate progress, neither condemning nor forgiving, merely witnessing the culmination of a pact their suffering had sustained. In the dining room, Elizabeth stood at the window, her body rigid as a marble effigy. Her shadow no longer mimicked her posture, but instead reached toward the manifestation rising from the collapsed storehouse, its arms elongated impossibly, fingers stretching toward its brethren with unmistakable yearning. "The circle forms," Mary intoned, her copper hair now floating around her face as if suspended in water. "What was divided seeks wholeness. What was imprisoned demands freedom." Augustus had ceased his struggles, his form now perfectly still upon the oriental carpet. The darkness that had invaded him pulsed beneath his skin in rhythmic waves, each throb corresponding to the expanding presence outside. His eyes, those depthless pools of shadow, reflected not horror but something approaching ecstasy, as if the invasion had granted him understanding previously unattainable through human consciousness. The bargain was flawed from inception, Harriet said, her protection charm now completely melted, the bone fragments arranged in a perfect circle upon her palm. Your ancestor believed he could control what dwelled here through ceremonial binding, but such entities cannot be truly contained, only temporarily appeased. Through the shattered dining room windows came the scent of upturned earth and something older, a primordial musk that evoked memories of underwater caverns and lightless depths where pale, blind creatures slithered through ancient silt. The wisteria vines, animated beyond natural movement, had forced their way inside, their woody stems cracking the remaining window panes as they sought purchase on the interior walls. Young William and Catherine stood hand in hand, their small figures silhouetted against the supernatural glow now emanating from the family cemetery. Their shadows had fully detached, standing slightly apart, taller and more angular than childish forms should allow. When William spoke, his voice carried the weight of accumulated generations. The land remembers what is buried within it. Tonight, the hollow reclaims its own. Tendrils of that sentient darkness flowed through the fractured windows, caressing the Blackstone dining room's opulence with a lover's terrible intimacy. The ancestral silver blackened upon contact while the damask walls blistered and peeled, revealing older patterns beneath, crude symbols etched in substances best left unidentified. The temperature plummeted further until each exhalation crystallized before horrified eyes, tiny fractal monuments to the last breaths of the living. Nathaniel's hands, still clutching the unholy relics, had lost all sensation, not merely numbed by cold but transformed into instruments belonging to another will. His fingers moved independently, arranging the 7 ossified digits in a precise pattern upon the dining table. Each placement produced a sound like distant thunder, though the bones themselves made no physical contact with the mahogany surface. "The covenant requires completion," whispered Harriet, her normally steadfast voice wavering between octaves. "Not by ignorant sacrifice as your ancestors believed, but through conscious surrender." Elizabeth felt her shadow pulling away, drawing her essence through unseen apertures between flesh and spirit. The sensation wasn't painful, but rather a profound unmooring, as if she had spent her entire life ballasted to the earth by artificial weights now being methodically removed. Memories not her own flooded her consciousness. The taste of strange fruits from forests long vanished beneath Blackstone cultivation. The sensation of dancing barefoot around fires that burned blue instead of orange. Languages whose consonants required more than human vocal apparatus to pronounce correctly. From the collapsed storehouse, the column of darkness continued its terrible expansion. Where it touched the estate's ancient oaks, their bark sloughed away like diseased skin, revealing luminescent sapwood that pulsed with the same rhythm as the shadow entity. The family cemetery's headstones now levitated slightly above ground, turning slowly like the hands of some macabre timepiece counting down the remaining moments of Blackstone dominion. A dreadful harmony emerged, first barely perceptible but swelling gradually, until it resonated through bone and tissue. This was no earthly music, but rather the sympathetic vibration of matter recognizing its true master. The chandelier crystals chimed without physical contact. The grandfather clock's internal mechanisms reversed direction, and even the foundation stones beneath the manor groaned in terrible recognition. Mary's copper hair had completely transformed, each strand now a filament of living flame that cast no heat yet illuminated the room with spectral blue light. Her eyes reflected not the limited perception of human vision, but rather the comprehension of epochs, geological ages when what now surged from beneath the storehouse had walked openly upon a younger earth. "The binding unravels," she intoned, her gaze fixed upon something beyond physical walls. 3 generations was the covenant's span. 3 generations has the hollow waited. Through gaps in the shattered windows, Nathaniel glimpsed the Blackstone fields beyond the formal gardens. The meticulously cultivated tobacco rows undulated like ocean waves, the plants themselves uprooting and rearranging into concentric circles mirroring the pattern on the stone tablet. Within each circle, the soil darkened and bubbled as if heated from below, releasing vapors that twisted into ephemeral forms before dissolving into the night air. Augustus, still prone upon the floor, began speaking in polyphonic tones, his voice layered with others, creating a horrifying chorus that recounted the true history of Blackstone Hollow, each revelation worse than the last, each confession more damning than its predecessor, culminating in the terrible truth. The Blackstones had never truly owned this land. They had merely borrowed it from entities that predated human civilization, entities that had finally come to collect on a debt long overdue. The ancestral Blackstone manor surrendered to its inevitable dissolution as midnight's 13th toll faded into abyssal silence.